Sure, I'll try to talk in an Irish accent as well, shall I? or maybe not. Okay, thanks. So yes, I'll be talking about controlling feral cats with a toxin that's relatively recently been registered for use in New Zealand on cats and stoats, which is, of course, PAPP. And I'd briefly just like to thank my co-authors on this presentation as well, other people from Manaaki Whenua and also from Hawke's Bay Regional Council who helped with this work. But I thought I'd start off talking about why it is we want to control cats on farmland in the first place. So as we've talked about quite a bit already over the last day or two, not all of the native biodiversity is in national parks or sanctuaries or bush. A lot of it is in pastoral landscapes. And this is a photograph here of part of the Cape to City landscape. You can see that it includes a whole range of different habitats. It's not just pasture. There are lakes and streams, there are wetlands, there are fragments of native bush, there are fragments of exotic bush. And that stuff is habitat for all sorts of creatures. We've got native birds, lizards and invertebrates in there, but of course it's also pretty nice habitat for feral cats. And just as an example, from one farm in northern Hawke's Bay called Toronui Station, the Regional Council trappers managed to pull out 17 cats in just 3 weeks from an area of just a few hundred hectares, so that there are a lot of feral cats out there. And those cats are having all sorts of undesirable impacts. So of course, as everybody knows, they do prey on native birds and other native fauna. But they're also a problem for pastoralists because cats are the definitive host for the disease toxoplasmosis. So that means that when I say that they're the definitive host, that means the disease is not capable of completing its life cycle unless there are cats there. So if you have no cats, you have no toxoplasmosis. And this is a disease that causes what they call abortion storms in sheep. You can have really significant loss of lambs. And there is a vaccine, but it's very costly. So farmers in Hawke's Bay spend over $300,000 a year vaccinating, and it's a really hard job to do the vaccination, and even when you do it, it's not always effective. It's not guaranteed to work, so you might spend your money and all your effort vaccinating and still get an abortion storm in your sheep flock. And the estimated losses of lambs in Hawke's Bay annually, if there was no vaccination, are over $1 million per annum. So cats are not just a problem for biodiversity, they're a problem for sheep farmers as well. Okay, so what is PAPP? Well, it's an abbreviation for para-aminopropiophenone, so we'll just call it PAPP. And that's a picture of the molecular structure of the poison there. But the way PAPP works is that it binds to the hemoglobin in the animal's red blood cell, which prevents the red blood cells from being able to carry oxygen. And so what that means is it's a very humane toxin. Basically, the animal will just start to feel sleepy, thinks to itself, oh, I'll just lie down here and have a bit of a kip, and then it'll just drift off peacefully. So it's really very humane. It's a fast-acting poison as well, just 1 or 2 hours from ingestion to death. And it has the added advantage that it's more toxic to mammals than it is to birds. So there's a certain amount of target specificity there as well. And one other advantage is that there is an antidote available for PAPP. So, for example, if you have farm dogs and one of those accidentally consumes a bait, as long as you get to it pretty quickly and give it the antidote, the dog should be all right. So PAPP has been registered for use in New Zealand for cats and stoats now for about 5 years or so, but it hasn't really been widely taken up yet for use. They are using it quite a bit in Australia though, and in a recent trial, Dirk Hartog Island in Western Australia, which is a large island, 58,000 hectares, they had a bunch of feral cats with radio collars, and then they used PAPP baits on the island, and 95% of those radio collared cats were killed. So it looks like it has very good potential as a control tool for feral cats. So what I'm going to talk about today is a trial that took place here in Hawke's Bay on Toronui Station, which is just up near Tutira, northwest of where we are today. And this was conducted by Hawke's Bay Regional Council. They used 48 bait stations. They looked like this one in the photograph here. They call it a submarine bait station because it looks a bit like a sub. The cats climb in through that hatch at the top, and then the baits are inside the wooden box in there. That has the advantage of excluding most non-target species from eating the baits, but for some reason cats just seem to love jumping in through that top hatch and going inside. So it's quite a clever design. And here is a map of where the bait stations were. So the red circles show the bait stations. There were 48 of them, about 500 metres apart across the farm. And initially, each bait station had non-toxic meat baits placed in it to get cats accustomed to coming in and eating the food. So it was just balls of rabbit mince. And then after a few days, those non-toxic baits were replaced with toxic ones, 3 baits per bait station, and those were left in place for 5 days before they came back and took them away again. And over the same period, the activity of cats on the farm was monitored with 40 camera traps, which are the sort of yellowy, greeny, snot-coloured dots on the map there. So we got an idea of the numbers of cats that were running around before, during and after the baiting operation. So here's a picture of Rod Dixon from the Regional Council setting one of the camera traps. Those were put in place 3 weeks before the baiting actually started, and then left in place, and we monitored again for another 3 weeks immediately after baiting finished. And we used the cameras to estimate both the change in the abundance of cats on the farm and also their spatial distribution across the landscape. And we got a pretty big difference. So this is quite similar to one of the figures that Patrick presented just before. Each of those red dots is an area where a feral cat was detected on camera, and the larger the circle, the more cats were detected. So you can see here on the left-hand side, before PAPP baiting, 42 encounters with cats at 22 cameras, and we were getting a camera trap rate of 5%. So that's similar to a tracking tunnel rate. So for every 100 camera trap days, we got 5 cats. And then immediately after control, we got pretty much exactly a halving of the numbers. So 22 photos at 14 cameras, and equating to a camera trap rate of 2.5%. And we know that cats removed baits from 17 of the bait stations, so the assumption is that 17 individual cats were probably killed by that operation. And this graph just shows that the difference we observed there is actually statistically significant. So what this graph shows is just the ratio of cats before control to after control. So you can see it's a ratio of 2 to 1. And we've got a 95% confidence interval displayed around that ratio, and even the lower limit of that confidence interval is still greater than 1. So it shows that there's no doubt about it. It's not just sampling error. There was a statistically significant difference in the camera trapping rate before and after that control operation. Just one or two other points to note about that result. First is that most of the cats that were detected in the post-control period were around the edges of the property. So you can see the very few cat detections on the right-hand side there towards the centre. So that suggests that possibly some or potentially even most of the detections we got after control might even have been cats already starting to re-invade the area from the surrounding landscape. So in fact, if anything, this method might be underestimating just how effective the population reduction was. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, is that there were initially planned to be 2 rounds of PAPP baiting in this operation, and unfortunately the weather conditions didn't allow for that second application of baits. So we saw a 50% reduction in cat abundance with just a single application of PAPP, but it's very likely that if the operation had gone ahead as planned with 2 applications, we would have got an even more substantial population reduction than that. So it really is a very encouraging result for the potential effectiveness of PAPP as a population control tool. And just finally, I want to mention that there has been a second PAPP trial conducted very recently, once again by Hawke's Bay Regional Council, but this time in collaboration with Boffa Miskell, and that was on Toronui Station. They used basically the same methods as the trial that I've just described, only this time they did have that second round of bait application, and Lee Shapiro, who's pictured in the photograph there, is currently busy crunching the numbers from that trial, but Lee tells me that the results are looking pretty encouraging. They got a much more substantial reduction in cat numbers than we had in our previous trial, so those results will be hopefully available soon. And finally, what does this mean in terms of management of feral cats? So we saw that just a single application of PAPP baits succeeded in reducing cat numbers by about 50%, and we also saw that the spatial distribution in cats in that landscape was substantially reduced. So it's a very encouraging result, and we probably would have got an even better result with a second application of PAPP. So the upshot is that PAPP looks very likely to be a useful control tool, both for initial knockdown of cat populations in areas where they haven't previously been controlled, also potentially as a spot control tool at times or areas where cat numbers are starting to recover from control, and it is also likely to be very useful as a complement to other methods such as trapping and shooting. Okay, and I'd just like to also thank these various people who were instrumental in doing both the cat baiting and the camera trapping, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any comments on the method of presentation?
The presentation of the baits?
Yep.
So there were 3 toxic baits in each bait station, and those were just basically a meatball of minced rabbit meat with some. The PAPP poison is available. You can buy it in tubes in a paste. So a set dose of PAPP was mixed into each meatball, and in theory the dose in a single bait should be lethal for a cat, but there were three meatballs in each bait station.
I was just wondering about time of year that the Toronui trial was done compared with the one on Ngā Tapa.
I'm pretty sure it was similar time of year. The Toronui was about September, and I think Poti Ngā Tapa was a similar time of year. Is that right? Yeah, very similar. So the results should be directly comparable. Yep.
Yeah, Al, any issues with secondary poisoning, which may not necessarily be a negative, depending on...
I believe, I'm not an expert on the toxicology, but I believe that PAPP does degrade quite quickly once it's been consumed by the animal, so I believe the risk of secondary poisoning is fairly minimal. But yeah, as I say, I'm not fully across the toxicology of it. So.
I've got two questions. One, how readily available is PAPP to the basic farmer? And two, with your cameras, did you see anybody else or anything else get in there to have a feed of that bait?
Okay, the first question, PAPP is readily available through the company that produced it are called Connovation, and if you do a Google search for Connovation NZ, they have the tubes of PAPP paste for sale there. And secondly, we did see other animals on camera, but not actually entering the bait stations. To clarify, some of the cameras were right close to a bait station, and the bait station was in the field of view. Others were not, so we didn't have a camera watching every single bait station. But as far as we know, there weren't any other species that entered.
Any comments on the selection of the chimney box style of bait station versus other styles of bait station that could have been available?
It's probably the guys who actually conducted the baiting might be better placed to answer that than me, but what I've been told is that chimney style bait station is very effective. I've certainly seen a lot of footage of cats jumping in and out of them. They seem to love it, and it does seem to be quite target specific. So things like birds and dogs are not going to go in there. I don't know if there have been any direct comparison trials with other designs of bait stations.